not locked in here with you. That's it! You're locked in here with me!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker. And you are locked in here with me, examining all the crazy stuff relating to real estate. I am a licensed real estate broker in the state of California. Also a member of the National Association of Realtors. But please don't hold that against me. Some interesting tidbits today. I've kind of modified how I handle some of my social media stuff. Then I had some interesting interactions with folks on LinkedIn relating to an article, so we're going to talk about that a little bit because I think it's interesting info we should share with everyone. I'd like to remind everyone that if you are interested in buying, selling, or investing in real estate, please consider me as a resource for you if you are in the Silicon Valley area. I tend to serve the southern Silicon Valley area, going from Mountain View and Sunnyvale all the way down to Gilroy. Born and raised in the area and happy to help anyone reach their goals, no matter what they may be in the real estate world. And today what we're going to cover is some interesting, and we're going to do a couple of things. I wanted to sort of give you a sample of what's going on in the world, right? What direction is the wind blowing? What are we seeing in terms of numbers in a variety of markets that we've always sort of considered bellwether markets, right? And those typically are markets that had really big fluctuations in the downturn, followed by some pretty big investing, that kind of stuff. So we're going to do a general survey of those. But in addition to that, I also wanted to cover some interesting data that I covered in a LinkedIn post and had someone respond to, and that was the current data relating to optimism, right? The confidence number for builders. And this is something, for those of you who've been listening for a while, know that we've been talking about this for a super long time. I think we mentioned this before. We had hit a peak, right? There was a dramatic peak that we hadn't seen in, I don't even remember what it was, 13 years, 12 years, something like that. And we kind of tempered it with some other things. And we're going to talk a little bit about why just taking confidence numbers at least relating to builders, I don't think necessarily is something for you to make a decision on. It should maybe inspire you to look more deeply, because I know in terms of numbers we cover here to try to get greater insight into what to expect from the real estate market, that has been one of the most unreliable numbers ever. And in both directions, right? So we've had instances way back where confidence was at a peak, but all the actions you would expect a confident builder to take were not happening, right? So a lot of folks are out there saying, hey, look, the National Association of Home Builders, their confidence ratings are just amazingly high right now, but then we don't see houses getting built, right? So that's why it's one of those numbers, I think, that if you see it making a change that you think is something that is significant, look a little bit more into it, and you may find that the actions don't back up the survey, right? Surveys can be tough, right? If you go around and you ask someone a question, they may not be thinking the same thing in their head that you're thinking about. And of course, if they're talking about the National Association of Home Builders and they're talking to home builders, you would think they would get it. But since there is this disconnect between what the survey asks or what the responders say to the survey and what we get out of it, there's clearly something else going on. And who knows, maybe it's about them saying what they think the survey askers want them to say. I do not know. All I know is that historically, for me anyway, it's been ridiculously unreliable in terms of using it to estimate where things are going to happen in the next building cycle. For homes, for instance, which is really as far as we could take it, right? I'm not going to try to take a number today and tell you that means we'll have great buildings in 2 years, but it is something you should be able to look at and say, all right, well then will we likely see more new homes come onto the market in the next sales season, which is coming up, right? All right, so let's go ahead and first do our quick survey of the markets that I think are ones we should look at. Where are we at? Here we go. So let's start with Sacramento. Now, Sacramento is one of those, and we have a great listener up in Sacramento that we interact with quite a bit. Now, every once in a while, he'll give us updates on what's going on with the markets, and it's Sacramento has been an interesting one because it's had its ups and downs. But sales are up 5.6% year over year. Active inventory down 32.7%. Those are the kinds of numbers that tell you what to expect in a marketplace. Now, these, again, are for January. And we're early in the year, right? That's the first month of the year. So that's a little bit concerning, particularly given the dramatic drop in inventory. A 32.7% drop in year-over-year inventory is ridiculously significant. I mean, a third drop is something you want to make note of. And particularly when you see that the sales are up, which indicates an increase in demand from the previous year, that spells a potential increase in sales or demand for properties in that area that feeds the beast, right? It feeds the more expensive real estate beast. Another one, this one is California in general. California January housing sales are up 10.3% year over year, but inventory is down year over year 26.9%. That's across the state. Now, it's always important. We obviously just talked about Sacramento, and even if you live in the Sacramento area, I would not take that as gospel on what you should think about your area, and here's why. Areas around Sacramento are one of the areas that I tend to check, more so now, right? Though they've modified the multiple listing service here in California to the point that I can now pretty much search the entire state and get the inside baseball, inside realtor view of those areas. Now, it used to be you could really only search the MLSs that you subscribe to, right? So to get the most accurate data, my stuff would cover everything from San Francisco down to Monterey predominantly. And over the years, we've basically seen that expand. And now I can create basically the same search that someone would do in Sacramento for the Sacramento area. I can do the same thing for LA, San Diego. So I can create these searches, and I do that, particularly with areas in Sacramento. And one of the areas I look at is Roseville. And what I like to look for, and this is something you can do too, if you want to check it out for yourself, you can go up onto Trulia, Zillow, I believe this, and Realtor.com is another one that does the same thing, where you will get a little icon if you're looking at sort of a map view and you're seeing all the properties that meet your search criteria. You can see a little arrow that'll tell you, has the price recently been raised or has the price recently been reduced? And if there's no arrow, obviously it is what it was listed at originally. And what I'm finding interesting, not just in those areas, but even here in my area, in Silicon Valley, I am seeing an awful lot of properties that have had their price dropped. So given still this reality that statistics tell us, we're seeing a lot tighter of a market that's going to point towards more expensive housing. We are still, right now, seeing those properties that get their price dropped. So we're not seeing huge multiple offer scenarios. We're not seeing every property just blowing out the door. So the point I'm trying to make, it's a micro market. Roseville is one of those where I'm seeing tons of amazing opportunities for properties. I'm seeing lots of properties that have been on the market forever. Now, Roseville is just north of Sacramento. I'm a fan of Roseville. I like Roseville. I actually used to live just north of that in a little town called Cool, which is just east of a town called Auburn. And Auburn is, if anyone knows the area, the only town they're going to recognize the name of is probably Auburn, as that's sort of up the freeway from Roseville. The point being that even while we're seeing this in some of the more in-demand areas of Sacramento, there are still areas where you're going to find opportunities as an investor. And in fact, we could even do a deep dive here coming up on a YouTube post showing, examining different areas of Sacramento and finding properties that would potentially be positive cash flow. And that also answers another question I get pretty frequently. Are there any areas in California where you can get good deals that will be positive cash flow? And of course, the answer is yes. California has some extremely rural areas where you can get extremely good deals on properties and not pay these crazy amounts. But everyone hears about the Silicon Valley area, which is where the average home goes for $1 million, that type of thing. So yes, there are areas where you can absolutely get into the marketplace and purchase homes and make them positive cash flow. But again, you're going to want to find out what the micro market is in your local areas. And there's so many great tools, particularly the ones we've talked about here on this show and that we've already covered. We just did a video a few weeks back where we walked through doing a search at sort of the 10,000 foot view and then drilling down to specific neighborhoods to find those investments that make sense. All right, so let's continue with this. Phoenix, which is another town. It's another canary in the coal mine. Sales up 18.1% year over year. Active inventory down 38%. So just short of 40% drop in inventory. All of these point to, in a general sense, and remember, I'm always suggesting that you look at the micro market. What's the very specific demands of your area and not just your whole city? But this indicates that in those areas of demand in Phoenix, we're going to see a lot of demand for properties and not as many properties as we've seen just compared to last year. So I think that that's an interesting thing to note. A lot of folks have been talking about the expectation being that we would see a less competitive 2020. A lot of folks writing articles today about the effects of the coronavirus on real estate potentially. Now, granted, this is data that was probably compiled or was compiled before we sort of have reached more of a critical mass of public opinion on the coronavirus. In my opinion, though, we're really not there. I live in one of the areas that you would think would be concerned. We've had a couple of cases here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I'm just not seeing anything that indicates to me that things are slowing down because of it. We'll see how that pans out. I'm trying to imagine in my mind ways that this could go that would potentially hit real estate. But I'll be honest, in order for it to hit real estate, I think it needs to reach a point that is so overwhelming that it's hitting everything. It wouldn't just be hitting real estate. I think an awful lot of stuff ends up getting hurt by this long before it ever becomes a real estate problem. Okay, so we've sort of done a quick survey generally across the board of different communities that I consider to be sort of canaries in the coal mine, as I mentioned. All of them indicating we're going to see a more competitive marketplace. So what's the takeaway? Well, for my buyers, it is while you're going to see a lot of competition for properties you're probably going to want, particularly if you're shopping in these areas, keep in mind that there are going to be areas where you can still find micro markets that will work for you. But also keep in mind, if you're absolutely determined to purchase in one of these areas that are representative of these numbers, where there's less inventory to choose from and more people buying, you're going to have to go in there with some sort of an edge. You're going to have to really take a personal survey of who you are as a buyer. What can be the value add of your offer? How can you make your offer stand out? What about your pursuit of the property? And we've talked about this before. It can be ranging from the financial, meaning you come in there with more earnest money, demonstrating to the seller that you are absolutely dedicated to this transaction. Because remember, we still see escrows fail, and the number one reason that escrows fail is because of financing. So the more you can allay the fears of the seller based on your financing, the better off you're going to be. Now, of course, the ultimate situation would be to buy in all cash. But you know what? Most people can't do that. So make sure to go in there with a pre-approval. Be pre-approved for your loan. Don't just walk in there and say you'll get approval. In fact, given what I'm hearing about these numbers, your offer would be put at the bottom of the pile if you're not pre-approved. So just make sure you've got that squared away. Put down the maximum you can that can be at risk for the purchase to be earnest money. Now, the interesting thing here is there is no risk to you other than not having the money to do something with, which you probably wouldn't anyway. If this is all money that's going to ultimately go to your down payment, it's money you're not going to control. It's not money you're going to ultimately spend other than on this house, but be willing to put more of it up front. Now, in the state of California, you never have more than 3% of the purchase price at risk, right? So at a minimum, you want to put 3% and point out that, hey, in California, 3% is what the limit, and it says it right there in the contract, 3% is the limit of what you can have at risk. So even if you do back out for a reason that's your fault and doesn't get covered within the contract, you would still get back anything over that 3%. Now, you'd lose 3%, and that's a bad thing, and you don't want that to happen, and you want to make sure the contract's written to protect you so that you're not going to lose that money. However, let's say that, let me give you a scenario that I've used in the past. You come in with either 3% or more, knowing that the most that's at risk is 3% anyway, and you come in at 10%. You bring the full 10% to escrow to say, this is how dedicated I am to you purchasing your home. So that's number one. It's not a comfort because the seller can potentially get your money, but it's a comfort because you've shown financially you are all in, you're on board, you're ready to go. The other thing is, let's say this is a scenario where all the inspections have already been done by the seller. If you're satisfied with their inspections, sign off on those contingencies in the offer. Go ahead and sign off on your 17-day or 14-day, whatever your agent was going to do. I think the default is usually 17 days or 14 days, and I think it's 18 days there's different ones in there. But there are different contingencies that have to be taken care of over the course of the contract. If you sign the contract without a contingency for you to do any inspections because you're happy with the inspections that have been done, you are in a better position. If someone comes in at the exact same price you come in, but they have that inspection contingency in there, you're going to win. So keep all of these things in mind if you're concerned you're going to be in a multiple offer scenario. But then also, as I said, look into areas that are still within a reasonable commute of where you're trying to get that aren't as impacted by this increased demand and lower volume of inventory than the place that you're looking, right? If you can gravitate towards a lower competition market, you're going to be able to purchase that home more easily. You're going to be able to purchase it without competition. You're going to be able to purchase it likely for below asking instead of at or above asking. So make sure to keep that in mind. Okay. So let's go ahead. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to jump into what is going on with the National Association of Home Builders confidence numbers, and we're going to try to smack it with a little bit of reality and see if it's something we should put much stock in. So don't go away. We'll be right back. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner, broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Welcome back, everyone. So we are just coming back from the break, and as promised, we're going to talk about the latest data on the U.S. home building, National Association of Home Builders confidence numbers. It's interesting because the latest info is that it's at all-time highs. Now, while it is, in fact, at all-time highs, it also went down in the most recent numbers, and that was something that got brought up. I tweeted about it, posted it to LinkedIn, Facebook, the usual outlets, and had someone ask me for a little bit more insights into it. And the bottom line is it went down 1 point from 75 to 74, and we are basically at an all-time high for this number. The last 3 monthly readings mark the highest sentiment level since December of 2017. So we're seeing some really high numbers here. But here's something else. Think back to 2017. We were chatting about these highest sentiment levels since December of 2017 in December of 2017. And at the same time we were seeing these high confidence levels, we saw jack in terms of construction. Now, we continue to see the usual stuff. Now, back then, what we wanted to see was single-family residential construction. What we got was multi-units, right? We were getting apartment complexes. We were getting, and in the years prior to that, we were getting the crazy, gigantic apartment complexes that we see in South San Jose that hug the 85 freeway. We were seeing, and what we were seeing with this in 2018 was the absolutely insane, gigantic apartment complex that went up in Gilroy. Now, do we need multiple family housing? Absolutely we do. But if you want to talk about something that's been overbuilt in this area, in Silicon Valley, that is it. And the way the thing that concerns me is that the way these have been built makes them ridiculously low in terms of desirability. They are packed together as tight as they possibly can be. And we're talking, I think the units that I saw in South San Jose along the 85, that gigantic, like 8-building campus of apartments is also like 9 or 10 stories tall. I mean, it's insane. I've walked through there just sort of to look around and see what it's like. And that is some tight confines. And it doesn't look like a lot of effort went into providing a lot of privacy, though everybody can hear each other. Not high preference housing, right? So we got that, but what we needed was some smart single family residential development, and we didn't get it. Despite the fact some of these numbers that they were getting surveyed about specifically related to single family residential development. So the question became, because the headlines were screaming that we saw this decrease in the confidence level of builders. Well, okay, as with last time, we need to look at the other things, the other measurements that give us information relating to this. Because I'll tell you what, in terms of data we talk about on this show, the confidence numbers of builders is the least reliable number I think I've come across. And that's probably true of most surveys, right? And in everything from politics to housing, you can't really hang your hat on those numbers. In this case, I would not even flinch with a 1-point drop anyway, but it just doesn't jive with things that tell us construction is going on, right? So what are things? What are the things that I, as a guy who digs understanding what's happening with real estate and what is likely to happen, what are the things I care about? Well, I care about architectural billing hours and what kind of architectural billing hours. Right? Is it commercial? Is it high density multifamily? Is it single family residential? Who is paying the money to the architects to design the new buildings? Because that tells us somebody's planning to build something in the not too distant future, right? Because they're getting it designed by an architect. The other thing would be, and this is super timely, right? If we're seeing lumber prices going up, that indicates an increase in demand. Now, the Chinese stopped buying our lumber a year or so ago, right? We talked about that, where we saw this drop in the price of lumber. But at the same time, if we compensated for what was the demand of China, the domestic demand for lumber actually went up. So that was an indicator we were seeing an increase in construction in the United States. Finally, permits. Now, permits are great because they are a thing that gets filed with the county and the state that says we want to build this thing. And it is an investment of money, as are these other things. If you're buying lumber, obviously you're buying it to deliver it to a site pretty quickly and get the construction started. So I would say the permit part comes before the lumber part, and the architecture part comes before the permit part. But it is one of those indicators that tells you the permits are happening right now, which means these projects are going to get started proximally. In other words, if you're seeing a lot of permits right now, then we can probably expect to see homes start to go up for sale. We'll see models of these homes probably up for sale in just a couple of months, but then we'll see more of them coming online as we go through the year. And that's what we're seeing. Despite the fact we're getting home builders telling us we're 1 point less confident than we were before, we're seeing permits rise to the highest level since 2007. Well, that's a contradiction, isn't it? According to the folks over at Bloomberg, U.S. new home construction remained robust in January, and applications to build jumped to the highest level since 2007 as low mortgage rates and a solid labor market continued to fuel housing demand. Residential starts slipped 3.6% to a 1.57 million annualized rate, still the second fastest pace of the expansion after an upwardly revised 1.63 million pace in the prior month. According to government figures released Wednesday, January starts exceeded the median estimate in a Bloomberg survey of economists. Permits, a proxy for future construction, advanced 9.2% to a 1.55 million rate, the highest since March of 2007. So that tells me we're going to see more construction. And if you look at a table, U.S. applications to build homes, it takes us all the way back to what was 2007, right? And we were seeing that and you know, get the chronology in your head right? We need to make sure that's true. That is right on the cusp of when stuff took an absolute nosedive. After about that time in 2007, the number of permits just dropped to the floor over the course of the next year and a half, where it bottomed out in 2009, right? So the downturn started in late 2006, early 2007, depending on where you were in the country. But the important thing to note is that this is before all of that. So we're kind of now up to this point where we're seeing permits at the level that was happening right around the timeline prior to the downturn. I don't think that's a bad thing. Between now and then, in that time in the past, we have seen at least a mild increase in population, or at least a mild increase in demand in housing. I know California has been suffering from interesting migration where population, we still have more people migrating out of the state, but we still have an increase in population in at least in my area. So I think these are things where we've actually lost ground, right? Because we simply weren't building to the level we should have been over an awfully long period of time. So this tells me, despite the confidence, unless we want to simply decide that confidence has no link to actual actions you take in the real world. I mean, if you tell me I am not confident that Tesla is going to continue to sell cars, right? I am not confident that Tesla is going to succeed. I believe that ultimately some strange thing is going to happen, and Tesla electric cars as a company is going to crash and burn. I have no confidence. But if I then discover you're buying Tesla stock, that's a disconnect, right? Well, that's the kind of disconnect we're seeing here. They're expressing an opinion that would sure communicate to me as a builder they're not going to build. But then what we see happening as builders is they're taking actions that absolutely telegraph they are going to build. You don't get permits unless you're going to build. You don't go to the trouble, right? And prior to that, you don't pay the architects to design the buildings you're going to get permits for. And we're also seeing increases in the consumption of lumber domestically. So across the board on the things that are physical actions that tell us construction is happening, they're all telling us it's going on, right? Now, granted, from the lumber part of it, you don't know if that's multifamily or not, but from the permit standpoint, my understanding, and according to this article, is that we are in fact seeing an increase back to the levels of March 2007 of single-family residential construction. And I think that is excellent. Doesn't necessarily mean that's going to make things great in my market. This is obviously a national trend. It'll be interesting to see where these things get built. I know there's an awful lot of areas not here that are seeing growth, that are doing a lot of building, whether you want to talk about Austin or you want to talk about Idaho or you want to talk about Phoenix, Arizona. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Now, from a standpoint of what do we do with this, I think that you as an investor or a buyer simply look for the signs on the ground, and they're not hard to miss, right? The big billboards that say new homes, next exit, or turn around and go back one block and make a left to see new homes. These are going to be indicators to you this is happening in your area, and it would probably be smart to get a feel for how many of them are getting built. Now, this can obviously put pressure on the rental market. It's going to depend on the price point. Another thing I can't tell you across the board is, are these luxury homes for the areas where they're getting built, or are they more mainstream homes? I would like to think builders have realized that the luxury market is really not where they're going to get the best traction these days. Remember, we saw a lot of luxury homes get price drops last year, despite the fact it was an amazing year, and we saw mainstream homes going, and I sold some homes above asking. Those were all homes that were not above the line of what I would call luxury. So I actually think luxury is a soft market right now. We need to be below that. We need to be a little bit more mainstream in those sales numbers. Okay, there you go, folks. A nice bird's eye view of what's going on in a variety of communities and what I think is interesting data relating to properties that are being built for new home construction. The ground truth where you are is going to help define what you should do about it, but these are things you should be watching out for. And as always, the goal here is to leave you with more knowledge on the table than time you've invested. And if anything, I think this definitely gives you places you need to start looking into to see how it might affect you in your buying or investing or even selling strategies in the coming months. All right, folks, thanks again for listening. I'll talk to y'all next time.